I can tell you the exact moment my life split into before and after. It wasn't a fight or a letter or some dramatic confrontation in a public place. It was a laugh. A single short burst of laughter that slipped under a door I thought was locked to me forever. I had just come home early from work, rain soaking the back of my coat, my shoes squeaking on the hallway floor. The house smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla candles, my mother's favorite scent. I remember thinking how odd it was because she was supposed to be at her place across town. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it. That laugh. Low, warm, familiar. My husband's laugh. But tangled up with it like two vines choking each other was hers. My mother's. My pulse stuttered. For a second, I thought maybe they were watching a movie, reminiscing about something from the past. That was the only explanation my mind would allow. My husband and my mother had always gotten along, maybe too well, but never in a way that set off alarms until that second. I froze on the landing, listening. The laughter died, and in its place came a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Then the faint, unmistakable sound of movement. Slow, deliberate. I told myself to keep walking, to push open the bedroom door and prove to myself I was paranoid, but my hand stayed frozen on the railing. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew what I was about to lose, and part of me wanted to delay that moment for as long as I could. I stood there on the landing for what felt like a full minute, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs the only sound anchoring me to reality. My hand tightened on the railing, the wood slick beneath my damp palm. I could still hear faint rustling from behind the bedroom door. Fabric against fabric, the creak of the mattress. My brain scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe my mother was helping him change the sheets. Maybe she spilled something and they were cleaning it up together. But each theory fell apart as quickly as it formed. My mother wasn't supposed to be here. My husband didn't know I'd be home until evening. And whatever was happening in that room was happening behind a locked door. I took one slow step toward it, my sock catching on the edge of the carpet. And in that moment, the noises stopped completely. Silence again, but this time it felt alert, like someone on the other side was holding their breath. My own breathing felt too loud, echoing in my ears. I turned away, forcing myself down the stairs before my courage or my self-control could break. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't say a word. But as I stepped back out into the rain, my pulse still hammering, I knew I'd crossed into unfamiliar territory. One where my husband's loyalty and my mother's love were no longer things I could take for granted. That night, I barely slept. I lay on my side, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of my husband's breathing beside me. He was asleep within minutes, as if nothing had happened. No strange visit, no locked door, no silence heavy enough to crush a person. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to roll over, shake his shoulder, and demand to know why my mother had been there, why they'd locked themselves away. But my throat felt like it was closing, and the questions stayed trapped behind my teeth. Instead, I replayed the sound of their laughter over and over, each time hearing something darker in it, something I'd missed before. It wasn't the light, friendly laugh of family. It was intimate, too intimate. By morning, I had almost convinced myself to let it go, to believe my own carefully constructed lie that it was all just a misunderstanding. I made coffee, set his mug on the table, and watched him scroll through his phone like every other morning. When my mother called later, her voice was sweet, warm, and casual, as though the day before had been nothing more than ordinary. She didn't mention coming over. She didn't ask if I'd been home early. That omission stuck to me like static. It was the first small, undeniable confirmation that they were hiding something, and that they knew exactly what it was. Over the next week, the pattern began to show itself, subtle at first, like a shadow in the corner of my vision.
My mother started dropping by more often, always when I was at work or running errands. I'd come home to find an extra coffee mug in the sink, or a faint trace of her perfume lingering in the hallway upstairs. Once, I noticed the throw blanket from our couch folded neatly on the bed in the guest room, a room we almost never used. My husband brushed it off, saying she'd stopped in to borrow a book or bring over some leftovers. His tone was casual, his smile easy, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I told myself not to overthink it, that I was being paranoid, maybe even jealous of the attention they gave each other. But deep down, something inside me had shifted. I started memorizing details, times she'd called, the exact moments she'd shown up, the small changes in his mood after she left. One night, I found myself standing in the dark kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through security camera listings online. The idea of setting one up in my own home made my stomach turn, but so did the thought of living in a place where I had to guess what was real. I didn't buy one yet, but for the first time, I caught myself thinking like someone preparing for a war they hadn't admitted was coming.
It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that already felt slightly off. I'd left work early because a storm was rolling in, and the thought of being stuck in traffic under that black sky made my chest tighten. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his car there, which wasn't unusual, but the lights were on upstairs. In the bedroom, my stomach sank. I told myself it was fine. Maybe he was just taking a nap. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. But as I stepped inside, the air hit me like a wall. That same perfume, my mother's, hung heavy in the hallway. I froze in the entryway, every sense straining. There was faint music playing upstairs, something soft and old, the kind of jazz my mother liked to hum along to. I moved quietly, each step on the stairs slow and deliberate. Halfway up, I caught it, a shadow crossing the narrow strip of light beneath the bedroom door. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could hear voices, low and muffled, then a breathless laugh. For a moment, my hand twitched toward the doorknob, ready to fling it open and end the guessing. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a deep instinctive knowledge that whatever I saw would change me forever. I backed away, heart pounding, and left as silently as I'd come, the storm breaking overhead just as I reached my car. That night, I stared at the ceiling again, my mind replaying every second from the moment I pulled into the driveway to the sound of that muffled laugh. The storm outside had passed, but inside me, the pressure was building. I realized I couldn't keep living in this half state where everything was suspicion, but nothing was proven. It was eating me alive. So the next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do in my own marriage. I started making a plan. At lunch, I drove to an electronics store 2 towns over, somewhere I knew no one would recognize me. I bought a small, motion-activated camera, the kind you could hide inside a bookshelf or behind a plant. My hand shook a little as I signed the receipt, my mind whispering that this wasn't who I was, that good wives and good daughters didn't spy on the people they loved, but good wives and good daughters also didn't live with the gnawing certainty that something ugly was happening just out of sight. That evening, I waited until my husband went for his run and my mother wasn't around. I set the camera up in the corner of the bedroom, angled so it would catch the bed and most of the room without being obvious. As I stepped back to look at it, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt for crossing a line, relief for finally doing something to end this endless limbo. One way or another, I was gonna find out the truth. 2 days passed before I had the nerve to check the footage. I told myself I'd wait for something specific, a reason, but the truth was I was terrified of what I might see. That Friday evening, after my husband left to grab drinks with a coworker, I sat alone in the bedroom with my laptop. My hands hovered over the trackpad for a long moment before I finally opened the file. The video started in silence, just an empty room, daylight streaming through the blinds. For the first few hours, nothing happened, just the slow shifting of shadows as the sun moved across the floor. And then, just after 2 p.m., the door opened. My mother stepped inside. She wasn't carrying anything, not even her purse. She looked around slowly, as if checking to make sure she was alone, then walked to the bed and sat down. For a long minute, she just sat there, running her hand over the duvet in slow, absent motions. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse spiking. Then she stood, crossed to the dresser, and opened the top drawer, his drawer. I watched as she took out one of his shirts, brought it to our face, and closed her eyes. My stomach turned. She stayed like that for several seconds before neatly folding it back and leaving the room. It wasn't proof, not in the way I needed, but it was enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Whatever this was, it wasn't innocent.
That night, he came home earlier than usual, smelling faintly of the same cologne he always wore. But under it, I caught another scent. It wasn't perfume, not exactly, but it was hers, my mother's. He moved around the kitchen with an almost forced casualness, asking about my day, offering to make tea. I answered in short sentences, watching him. There was a faint tightness in his shoulders, a flicker in his eyes whenever I met his gaze. At one point, he leaned against the counter and said, "I think your mom dropped something by earlier. Did you see her?" My breath caught. The way he phrased it, too specific, too rehearsed, made something in my gut clench. I lied and said no, pretending to be distracted by the kettle. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me a second too long, as if he were trying to read my mind. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I kept replaying the image of my mother with his shirt, the way she'd held it like it was something intimate. It was just enough to feel wrong, but not enough to confront them. Not yet. That night, lying in bed beside him, I felt a gulf between us so wide I wasn't sure it could ever be crossed. And I realized with a cold, hollow certainty that both of them were now watching me, just as closely as I was watching them.
The next week, I almost convinced myself to take the camera down. Living like this, waiting, watching, was exhausting. But something in me refused to let go. A quiet voice insisting I was close to the truth. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was at work, my phone buzzed with a notification from the camera app. Motion detected. My chest tightened as I slipped into the empty conference room and opened the feed. At first, I thought the angle was wrong. 2 figures stood near the window, partially in shadow. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw them clearly. My husband, my mother. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his arm in a way that felt far too familiar. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, speaking softly, his face just inches from hers. They stayed like that for a few long seconds before she stepped back, looking toward the door as if listening for someone. He said something else, and she smiled, slow, deliberate, before leaving the frame. He remained for a moment, staring after her, then sat on the bed and buried his face in his hands. My pulse roared in my ears. I replayed the clip 3 times, hoping I'd see some innocent explanation in the gesture, the expressions. But the more I watched, the more certain I became whatever was happening between them, it had crossed a line long ago.
I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hand on his arm, the way they leaned toward each other like they were sharing a secret no one else could hear. By morning, something in me had hardened. I couldn't keep collecting fragments, half clues, moments that could be explained away if they wanted to lie well enough. I needed to see it with my own eyes, in real time. So I made a plan. I told my husband I had to work late on Friday, that a project deadline would keep me at the office until well past midnight. I said it casually over breakfast, not looking up from my coffee, as if it was nothing. He nodded, a little too quickly, like someone relieved to be given space.
I spent the next 2 days perfecting the details, where I'd park so my car wouldn't be seen, how I'd slip into the house without making a sound, even how I'd time my arrival to catch them when they'd be most comfortable, most certain they were alone. And by Friday evening, my nerves felt electric, every muscle tight with anticipation. I sat in my car 2 streets away, watching the minutes crawl by on the dashboard clock. At 9:47 p.m., I saw the upstairs light flick on through the small gap in the curtains. My chest constricted. I knew this was it, the moment where everything could shatter, and I was ready to walk straight into it. The house was dark when I slipped inside, the kind of darkness that feels intentional, like someone wanting privacy rather than absence. I didn't turn on any lights, letting my eyes adjust as I moved silently through the hallway. The only illumination came from upstairs, a warm, low glow spilling from the crack under the bedroom door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every step up the staircase felt heavier than the last, my body torn between the urge to rush and the instinct to stop. Halfway up, I heard it. A soft murmur of voices, indistinct but intimate, the kind of tone you don't use for small talk. Then, a sound that made my stomach twist. A quiet, breathy laugh. Hers. My mother's. I reached the landing, my fingers brushing the doorframe as I steadied myself. For one suspended second, I thought about turning back, about leaving this moment unbroken so I could keep pretending. But then I pushed the door open just enough to see. They were sitting on the bed, close enough that their knees touched, his hand resting over hers. Her face was turned toward him, her expression soft in a way I'd never seen before, at least not toward me. My breath caught, too loud in the silence, and they both looked up at once. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then she withdrew her hand, and he stood too quickly, stammering something I couldn't hear over the rush of blood in my ears. I stepped inside fully, shutting the door behind me. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. The room felt smaller with the 3 of us in it, the air thick with something I couldn't name but could feel pressing against my skin. My husband tried to smile, a nervous twitch that only made him look guiltier. "You're home early," he said, his voice too light, too careful. My mother didn't speak at all. She just looked at me, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes unreadable. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence grow sharp. "I am," I finally said, my tone flacked. "Guess I didn't need to stay at work after all." He opened his mouth like he was about to explain, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't bother. I've seen enough." My mother shifted in her seat, her hands folding neatly in her lap, like she was trying to look composed, but there was a faint tremor in her fingers. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice low. "Then tell me," I shot back, my chest tight. "Tell me what I'm supposed to think when I walk in on my husband holding my mother's hand in our bedroom." My husband stepped forward, his palms up in some weak gesture of peace. "We were just talking. On our bed?" My voice cracked on the last word, the hurt cutting deeper than I'd expected. They exchanged a quick glance, and in that flicker of connection, I saw the truth they wouldn't speak. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I realized this wasn't about catching them in the act. It was about the betrayal that had been living in this house for far longer than I knew. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything or demand they confess. Instead, I felt this strange, icy clarity settle over me, as if some part of me had been preparing for this all along. I looked at them, really looked, and saw fear in his eyes, defiance in hers. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. My footsteps slow, deliberate. I could feel them watching me, waiting for the explosion that never came. Downstairs, I grabbed my coat and keys, my movements mechanical, almost calm. The truth was, I wasn't calm at all. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the keys, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break.
outside, the night air hit me like a slap. Cold and bracing. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the dark outline of the house. If I confronted them now, they'd twist it, turn it into some misunderstanding, make me doubt what I'd seen. No, I needed more. I needed something undeniable, something that would burn through every lie they could invent. My mind was already moving ahead, plotting where I could place more cameras, what conversations I could record, how I could catch them in a way that even they couldn't talk themselves out of. If they thought tonight was the end of my suspicion, they were wrong. Tonight was only the beginning.
The next morning, I moved through the house like nothing had happened. I made coffee, asked about their plans for the day, even kissed my husband on the cheek before he left. My mother was in the kitchen too, sipping tea like she belonged there, like last night hadn't happened. She gave me a measured smile when I returned with equal precision. As soon as they were both gone, I got to work. I retrieved the spare cameras I'd ordered weeks ago, along with a small audio recorder I'd kept in a drawer for emergencies. Every placement was strategic. One in the living room, angled to catch anyone on the couch. Another in the hallway outside the bedroom, the recorder tucked behind a stack of cookbooks in the kitchen. I worked quickly, my heart hammering every time I thought I heard a car outside. By the time I finished, the house looked exactly as it had before. That evening, I played the role of the oblivious wife and daughter perfectly. I laughed at dinner, asked my mother about her garden, listened to my husband talk about work. But underneath the surface, I was counting the hours until I could review the footage. When they both finally went to bed, I slipped into the guest room and opened my laptop. The first few clips were ordinary, almost boring, until one in the kitchen made me freeze. My mother's voice, low but clear. She suspects something. And then his reply, just as calm. We'll have to be more careful.
I replayed the clip 3 times. My fingers clenched so tight on the laptop edge that my knuckles ached. The way they spoke, measured, unhurried, wasn't the panic of people caught in an affair. It was strategy. I kept listening. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the background making their voices sound even colder. My mother's tone shifted, dropping lower. It has to look like an accident. That way, she can't make trouble. My chest tightened so sharply I had to remind myself to breathe. And the money? My husband asked almost too quickly. Once she's out of the picture, my mother replied, everything will go to you. We'll be fine. There was a pause, the sound of a spoon clinking against a mug, and then her voice again, softer but no less lethal. She'll never see it coming. My vision blurred for a moment. Rage and disbelief tangled into something primal. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. They weren't just destroying my marriage. They were planning to destroy me. I closed the laptop slowly, forcing my hands to stop shaking. If I confronted them now, I could end up exactly where they wanted me, out of the way and powerless. No, I needed more. Proof that would hold up anywhere, against any lie they could spin. But more than that, I needed to stay alive long enough to use it. The next few days, I became someone else entirely. To them, I was still the same wife and daughter, smiling at the right moments, nodding at the right words. But inside, every move I made was calculated. I stopped drinking anything I didn't pour myself. If my mother offered to make me tea, I'd thank her sweetly and forget to drink it. I started eating only after they did, watching their plates closely, memorizing every bite. At night, I locked my bedroom door, claiming I needed quiet to sleep, and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I began leaving the house at odd hours, telling them I had errands. But really, I was meeting with a friend in private, someone I trusted enough to hold copies of the recordings. If anything happens to me, I told her, you know what to do. I could feel their eyes on me more than before, especially my mother's, as if she sensed I was slipping out from under her control. But I also saw the tiny cracks in their composure, the quick glances between them, the hushed conversations that cut off when I entered the room. I was no longer just their target. I was their unknown variable. And the more unpredictable I became, the more nervous they seemed. That gave me power. Small, fragile power, but it was enough to keep me moving forward.
It happened on a rainy Thursday night. I'd returned home earlier than planned, parking a block away so they wouldn't hear the car. The rain was heavy enough to cover my footsteps as I slipped up the side path to the kitchen window. The light was on inside, casting their silhouettes against the curtains. I couldn't see faces, but I could hear them, clearer than I expected, the storm muffling the rest of the world. "She's been too quiet lately," my husband said, his voice tense. "That's fine," my mother answered, her tone almost dismissive. "Quiet means she's given up." A pause, then the scrape of a chair. "So, when?" he asked. "This weekend," she replied without hesitation. "The cabin is perfect, isolated, no neighbors. By the time anyone finds her, it'll be too late." I felt my stomach turn, that air around me tightening. The cabin. I knew exactly which one she meant. My father's old hunting retreat in the mountains, a place we hadn't visited in years. It had no cell service, no one around for miles. He said something else, too low for me to catch, but her reply was sharp. "You just need to follow my lead. She trusts you more than me." I stepped back from the window, the rain soaking through my coat, my pulse pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. This wasn't just a vague threat anymore. It was a date, a location, a plan already in motion. And I only had 2 days to stop it. The next morning, I made sure my routine was flawless. I smiled over breakfast, asked if they were still up for a weekend getaway, and acted like the idea had been theirs all along. My mother seemed pleased, her lips curling into that subtle smirk she thought I didn't notice. My husband looked more cautious, but he nodded. Perfect. They needed to believe I was walking willingly into their trap. While they were out shopping for supplies, I set my own plan in motion. First, I called my friend again. "Change of plans," I told her. "If you don't hear from me by Sunday night, call the police and give them everything. Recordings, dates, all of it." I could hear the fear in her voice, but she agreed. Then I reached out to a private investigator I'd spoken to once before about something far less urgent. This time my tone left no room for hesitation. I gave him the cabin's address, the dates, and told him to be there, armed with a camera and ready to record. By the time they returned, I was back in character. I let them see me packing warm clothes, asking casual questions about the cabin as though I was reminiscing. Inside, though, every nerve in my body was wound tight. I knew I had to balance this perfectly, appear relaxed enough not to raise suspicion, but not so eager that they'd change their plan. That night, lying in bed with my husband steady breathing beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd make it back to this bed again.
We left early Saturday morning, the sky still heavy with the last traces of night. My husband drove, my mother in the back seat, and me in the passenger seat, staring out at the endless ribbon of highway. The air inside the car felt too still, like it was holding its breath along with me. I tried to focus on the passing scenery, bare trees, frost-tipped fields, but every mile marker felt like a countdown. They talked in low tones about the weather, about groceries we'd need once we arrived, but I caught the undercurrent, little glances between them, pauses that said more than words. I forced myself to smile when either of them looked my way. even joked once about how creepy the cabin was when I was a kid. My husband laughed, but it was too short, too controlled. As we climbed into the mountains, the cell signal dropped to nothing. My chest tightened at the sight of that little no service icon on my phone. This was it. Once we reached that cabin, there would be no easy way out. The snow on the road grew thicker, slowing our progress, but I didn't mind. Every delay felt like borrowed time. I kept reminding myself, the investigator will be there. He promised. Still, I couldn't silence the voice in my head whispering, "What if?" When the cabin finally came into view, dark wood against the white snow, chimney cold, windows blank, I felt my pulse in my throat. My mother's hand rested briefly on my shoulder as I stepped out of the car. "Just like old times," she said softly, and in that moment, I knew she wasn't talking about family vacations.
Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust, the air chilled for months of disuse. My boots echoed against the floorboards as I followed them inside, watching how easily they moved through the space, as if it were already theirs. My husband busied himself with stacking firewood, while my mother unpacked groceries onto the counter. It looked normal enough, but every gesture felt rehearsed, every movement calculated. I set my bag down in the small bedroom at the back, the one I'd slept in as a child. The window was still cracked at the frame, letting in thin ribbons of cold air. I kept my coat on as I stood there for a moment, scanning the room, memorizing exits, anything that could be used as a weapon if it came to that. When I rejoined them, my mother was stirring something on the stove. The smell was rich, savory, inviting. "Thought we'd have a nice dinner tonight," she said, her eyes flicking to me for just a second too long. My stomach tightened. I mumbled something about being tired from the drive and excused myself to take a walk, slipping my phone into my pocket. Outside, I crunched through the snow toward the tree line, scanning for any sign of the investigator. Nothing. No car tracks, no footprints, but ours. A gust of wind cut through my coat, carrying with it the faint sound of my mother laughing from inside the cabin. It wasn't a warm laugh. By the time I went back in, the table was set. My husband poured wine into 3 glasses, his expression unreadable. As I sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were both waiting for something. The fire crackled in the corner, casting long, swaying shadows across the wooden walls. My mother set a steaming pot in the center of the table, her hands steady, her smile just wide enough to feel wrong. My husband filled my plate first, then his own, then hers. He poured the wine last, sliding my glass toward me with deliberate slowness, his eyes meeting mine for just a fraction too long. I wrapped my fingers around the glass, letting the cold stem anchor me, but didn't lift it. The food smelled good, comforting even, but the tension in the room was so thick, it made every bite feel like a dare. They talked about the drive, about how quiet it was up here this time of year, how we could stay a while if we wanted. My mother's voice was light, but her gaze kept drifting to my glass. Once I caught her watching so intently, she didn't notice I'd stopped pretending to eat. I forced myself to take small bites from my plate, avoiding the wine entirely. Instead, I laughed when they laughed, nodded when they spoke, keeping my breathing slow and my face unreadable. The trick was to make them believe nothing had changed, that I was still the woman who trusted them enough to let her guard down. Halfway through the meal, my husband reached for the wine bottle again, topping off my glass even though I hadn't touched it. "You should relax," he said, his tone almost teasing. My mother's smile sharpened. I smiled back, letting my fingers graze the glass,
and then set it aside. "Maybe later," I said softly. And I swear, for just a second, I saw a flicker of frustration cross her face. After dinner, my mother insisted on clearing the table herself, shooing me toward the living room with a forced cheerfulness that felt like a dismissal. My husband stayed behind to help, but I could hear their voices, low, hurried, from the kitchen. I moved toward the fireplace, pretending to poke at the logs, straining to catch fragments of their conversation. "Tonight, before she," my mother's voice. "Sure it'll work?" my husband asked. "It has to." The clink of glass on glass followed, then the soft pop of a cork. I turned my head just enough to see them through the doorway, my mother pouring something from a small, dark bottle into one of the wine glasses. She stirred it lightly with her finger, glancing toward me to make sure I wasn't watching. I stepped back toward the fire, letting the heat sting my face, masking the cold rush of fear in my chest. They were moving faster than I expected. I had assumed they'd wait until later, after I'd gone to bed, when I'd be easier to handle. But now, I realized the plan might unfold before the night had even fully settled in. The sound of footsteps made me straighten. My husband entered, glass in hand, and sat beside me. "One drink," he urged, pressing it toward me. His smile was meant to be disarming, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wrapped my hands around the glass, feeling the weight of it. The investigators still hadn't shown up yet. There was no safety net yet. I needed more time. I set the wine on the mantel, forcing a yawn. "Maybe after I warm up," I said, curling my legs beneath me. He didn't push, but I could feel the disappointment radiating from him. And from the kitchen, my mother's voice, too bright, too quick, called us both to relax and enjoy the night.
The cabin's warmth felt suffocating now, every crackle of the fire like a countdown. My husband leaned back in his chair, studying me as though waiting for the right cue. My mother emerged from the kitchen with a plate of cookies, the kind she used to bake when I was a child. She set them on the coffee table, her eyes flicking from me to the untouched wine glass on the mantel. "You look tired," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll make sure everything's cleaned up out here." It wasn't a suggestion. I could hear the quiet command beneath the softness, the way she'd spoken to me when I was little and too afraid to disobey. My husband added, "Yeah, get some rest. We'll wake you when it's time for that drink." Every instinct screamed not to be alone with either of them, especially behind a closed door. I forced a smile, feigning hesitation. "Maybe I'll step outside first, get some fresh air before bed." My mother's smile froze for half a heartbeat before she recovered. "Of course, dear. Don't be long. It's freezing out there." I pulled on my coat and stepped into the night, the cold hitting me like a slap. My breath rose in clouds as I scanned the tree line again. This time, I thought I saw movement, a faint flicker of light like a reflection off glass. My pulse jumped. Maybe the investigator was here after all. I moved toward it cautiously, snow crunching under my boots. But before I could get close, the cabin door creaked open behind me. My husband's silhouette filled the doorway. "It's too cold," he called. "Come back inside." The light in the trees vanished.
I turned slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, even though my chest was tight with frustration. The warm glow from the cabin spilled onto the snow, and behind my husband's figure, I could see my mother hovering, her arms crossed like she was guarding the doorway. I gave them a sheepish smile. All right, I said, trudging back up the steps as if the cold had gotten the better of me. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. My coat was barely off before my mother was ushering me toward the hallway. "Go get comfortable," she said, her hand brushing my back just a little too firmly. My husband lingered near the kitchen, pouring another round of wine. I paused in the hallway, catching my reflection in the small mirror by the bedroom door. My face looked pale, drawn, but my eyes were sharper than I'd ever seen them. This was the point where panic could ruin everything. I had to be calm, deliberate. "I'll change into something warmer first," I told her, slipping into the bedroom and closing the door just enough to give me a sliver of privacy. My bag was by the bed. I knelt and reached beneath the folded clothes until my fingers found the small, cold weight of the pepper spray I'd hidden there. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. From the living room, their voices floated in, lower now, but urgent. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught, "after she lies down," and "just make sure she," before the rest blurred into the creak of the floorboards. I stuffed the spray into my pocket and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding in my ears. Somewhere out there, I was sure the investigator was close. I just had to survive long enough for him to reach me.
I turned off the bedroom light, letting the room sink into darkness. But I didn't get under the covers. Instead, I sat in the shadow corner near the window, where I could see both the door and a thin slice of the living room through the gap. My breathing slowed as I tried to quiet the pounding in my chest. At first, there was only the low murmur of their voices. Then my husband stepped into view, carrying the wine glass I hadn't touched. He glanced toward the hallway, his eyes narrowing when he saw the light beneath my door was gone. Satisfied, he disappeared back toward the kitchen. I shifted my gaze toward the window. Snowflakes had begun to fall again, catching in the faint glow from the porch light. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement near the tree line, just like before. A faint beam, maybe a flashlight, cutting through the dark for only a second before vanishing. My chest tightened with hope. From the living room came the sound of footsteps and the soft click of something being set down, metal against wood. My mother's voice followed, low and deliberate. "It'll be easy. She won't even wake up." My husband muttered something I couldn't hear. I gripped the pepper spray in my pocket, my knuckles aching. Every instinct told me to burst out now, to end this before they could make a move. But if I did, and the investigator wasn't close enough, I'd be trapped. Instead, I stayed still, listening, memorizing every sound. The clink of glass, the scrape of a chair, and then quiet, too quiet.
The silence pressed in on me, heavy and deliberate, like the air just before a storm. My ears strained for any sound, but the usual creaks of the old cabin were gone. Even the fire seemed to have settled into a low, muffled hiss. Then came the faintest sound, a slow turn of the bedroom doorknob. My grip tightened around the pepper spray until my fingers ached. The door didn't open all the way, just enough for a shadow to slip through. My mother's silhouette was unmistakable, her frame blocking the faint light from the hall. She didn't move at first, just stood there listening. I stayed perfectly still, my breathing shallow. Then she took a step in, holding something in her hand, long and thin, glinting faintly in the dark. My stomach turned cold. A second shadow appeared behind her, my husband. His voice was a whisper, urgent but controlled. "Do it quickly." They thought I was asleep. They thought I was defenseless. I shifted just enough to plant my feet, ready to launch myself forward if they got too close. My mother moved to the side of the bed, leaning over the lump I'd made from the pillow under the blanket. Her hand hovered, and I saw the gleam again. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they'd hear it. I waited until her wrist dipped toward the pillow. That was my cue. I surged from the shadows, aiming the pepper spray directly at her face. The hiss filled the room, followed by a sharp cry and the sound of the metal object clattering to the floor.
Her scream was raw and high, cutting through the heavy quiet of the cabin. My husband lunged toward me, his hands outstretched, but I stumbled back toward the wall, keeping the pepper spray raised. I fired again, the sharp chemical burn filling the air. He cursed, blinking rapidly, one hand clutching his face. The object my mother had dropped, a
A long kitchen knife gleamed on the floor between us. My eyes locked on it for a fraction of a second, but I didn't dare go for it. If either of them recovered faster than I expected, it would be over. "Crazy! She's lost her mind!" my mother gasped, clawing at her eyes. But her voice wasn't frightened. It was furious, as if I'd just ruined something she had carefully planned for months. I moved toward the door, my back to the wall, forcing them to keep their distance. "Stay away from me!" I shouted, my voice trembling, but loud enough to carry outside. Maybe the investigator, if he was really here, would hear. My husband tried to circle around, but I darted into the hallway, keeping them both in sight. They followed, my mother still half blinded, my husband wiping his streaming eyes with his sleeve. "You're not leaving," he growled, his voice low and guttural. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I just kept moving backward toward the front door, my fingers fumbling in my pocket for my phone. I didn't get a chance to pull it out. My mother lunged, grabbing at my arm. The pepper spray hissed again, and she shrieked, stumbling into the wall. Somewhere outside, over the pounding in my ears, I thought I heard the crunch of boots on snow.
The sound of boots in the snow was faint, but real. Steady, purposeful steps approaching the Catman. My chest tightened with a rush of hope so sharp it almost hurt. But there was still the matter of the 6 feet between me and the door, and 2 people determined to make sure I never reached it. My husband moved first, lunging toward me with his shoulder lowered like he was ready to tackle me. I sidestepped, the edge of the hallway table digging into my hip as I sprayed again. The mist caught him across the cheek, enough to make him stagger and curse. My mother, half blind and furious, grabbed a decorative vase from the side table and hurled it. It shattered against the wall inches from my head, ceramic shards spraying across the floor. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but I didn't slow. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "In here!" I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands trembling so hard I nearly missed it. My husband lunged again, catching the edge of my coat, but I yanked forward with everything I had. The fabric tore, sending me stumbling against the door just as it swung open. A tall man in a heavy parka filled the frame, his flashlight beam cutting through the chaos. His voice was calm but firm. "Ma'am, step outside, now." I didn't wait. I bolted past him into the freezing night, the snow crunching under my boots like it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Behind me, I heard the investigator's voice harden into a command. "Sir, stay where you are." The cabin's warm light spilled out into the snow, but for the first time all night, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like the end of something I'd been trapped in for too long.
The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing, pulling me fully into the moment. I stood just beyond the porch, gulping the frozen air as my legs trembled from adrenaline. The snow was still falling, soft and slow, but inside the cabin it sounded like a storm, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the investigator's steady commands cutting through the chaos. I could see them through the doorway in brief flashes. My husband, red-eyed and snarling, tried to explain, gesturing wildly toward me. My mother clutched the wall, her face streaked with tears, whether from the pepper spray or from the collapse of her plan, I couldn't tell. She kept pointing at me too, mouthing words I couldn't hear. The investigator stayed calm, his flashlight beam moving deliberately from one to the other. He glanced toward me once, giving the smallest nod, as if to say, "You're safe now." But my heart wouldn't believe it yet. I wrapped my arms around myself, the sting of the torn coat letting the wind bite at my skin. That coat had been a gift from my husband, one of the first after we were married. I remembered how proud he'd been, how gentle his smile had seemed back then. And now, that same man had stood in my bedroom doorway, telling my mother to do it quickly. The nausea rose in my throat, but I forced it down. Not now, not while their shadows still moved inside. A sudden loud thud snapped my attention back, something heavy hitting the wall. The investigator's voice rose, more commanding now. "Ma'am, drop it. Sir, sit down now." I realized my hands were clenched so tightly. My nails had dug half moons into my palms. I didn't relax them. Not yet. The flashing red and blue lights painted the snow in restless colors, each pulse washing over the cabin like a heartbeat. 2 uniformed officers moved past me, their boots crunching hard against the ice. I caught fragments of their voices, calm, measured, the way people sound when they've done this before. The investigator stepped out first, his parka dusted with snow. "They're not going anywhere," he said simply, his breath clouding in the cold. Behind him, I saw my husband and my mother being led out, each with a separate officer holding their arm. My husband's eyes met mine for the briefest second. No words, just a look, cold and empty. My mother didn't look at me at all. The cuffs clicked shut, metal on bone, and they were walked toward the waiting patrol cars. I stood rooted to the spot, watching the scene play out like it was happening to someone else. The investigator said gently, staring me toward the porch steps, "Paramedics are on their way to check you over." I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the snow. It was only when the last car door slammed that the tension in my shoulders gave way. My breath hitched, and then it broke, quiet at first, then shaking harder until I had to press my face into my hands. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the release of every moment I had held myself still and silent. Every second I had told my body not to shake, not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction. Now, with the cold biting my cheeks and the night finally, blessedly quiet, I let it all go. Somewhere behind me, an officer said something into his radio. The wind carried the words away, and I didn't chase them. For the first time in months, I didn't need to know what came next. I was alive, and that was enough.